It started with a noise so loud it shook the scarecrow clean off his pole. I dropped my coffee when I saw it, a sleek silver helicopter wobbling over my barn like a drunken dragonfly. The pilot tried to steady it, but the thing slid sideways, skidding across my private runway like it was on ice. And then whoosh, straight into my cornfield. Corn flew everywhere. Blades spinning, champagne spilling, and in the middle of it all, one furious woman in a coral blazer climbed out yelling, "Who put slippery paint on the runway?" That was Sarah Nelson, 60 years old president of the neighboring HOA. Self-proclaimed queen of all things suburban and shiny. She'd been using my private airstrip for her HOA's executive flights without ever asking. That morning her little aerial empire came crashing down literally, and I couldn't help but grin. Because I'm Brandon Green, 55 retired engineer, and that runway, it's mine. And Sarah Nelson had just landed herself in the biggest HOA mess of her life. Before we dive in, tell me your city and local time in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you love seeing HOA arrogance meet karma in midair. When I bought this land 20 years ago, the only traffic I ever worried about was crows fighting over corn and the occasional delivery truck taking a wrong turn. I built the airstrip myself, a clean 2,000-foot stretch of paved runway for my crop dusting days, back when I still contracted with local farmers. I got FAA clearance, all the right permits, and a proud little sign that read, "Private Use, B, Green Airfield." That sign used to mean something. Then came Sarah Nelson. Sarah had moved into the newly built gated community half a mile east, a paradise for retirees with money, golf carts, and more rules than the Ten Commandments. She was the self-appointed guardian of aesthetic order and neighborhood harmony, which in her language meant control everything you can see from your porch. At first I thought her reach would end at her fancy brick entrance gate. I was wrong. It started small. One afternoon, I saw a man in a neon vest walking my fence line clipboard in hand. When I asked who he was, he told me he was surveying for the HOA's extended recreational boundary. I told him that boundary ended 300 feet ago and pointed him back towards Sarah's manicured kingdom. He gave me that apologetic smile that means I'm just following orders. Within a week, a brand new sign appeared beside my mailbox, future site of Whitmore Landing, private jet access for residents. I stood there staring at it for a full minute before I started laughing. Surely it was some marketing stunt. Surely no one could be that bold. But sure enough, the following month, I saw tire marks on my runway that weren't mine. Then came the first guest flight. It was early morning. I was fixing a gate hinge when a sleek Cessna swooped down, landing smooth as silk on my airstrip. I ran toward it, waving my arms like a madman. The pilot gave me a polite nod as if I were airport staff. Out stepped a group of HOA board members, men in polos and women in heels, all led by Sarah Nelson herself, holding a clipboard and wearing a grin that could slice through butter. "Mr. Green," she called, as though greeting an old friend. "We're just testing out the airstrip for potential investors. You'll be compensated, of course." "Compensated," I said. "You mean trespassing?" She tilted her head, pity in her eyes. "Oh, Brandon. You must have missed the memo. The new county overlay shows this area as a shared amenity zone. Perfect for community aviation use," I nearly choked. "Ma'am, that overlay is my property. Bought, paid for, and registered under federal use." Her smile didn't waver. "You should be grateful. Property values go up when you cooperate." Then she and her board strutted off toward their shiny jet like they were boarding Air Force One. That night, I called Deputy Miller, an old friend from the sheriff's office. He showed up in uniform dust on his boots, scratching his chin as I told him the story. "Technically," he said, "if they touch down without permission, that's trespassing and unauthorized aircraft use. But if they're citing some county zoning document, it gets messy." "Messy," I muttered. "That's their specialty." He promised to look into it, but I could tell by his tone there wouldn't be much he could do. The HOA had influenced Sarah's brother, it turned out, sat on the county zoning board. Surprise, surprise. Over the next month, my airstrip turned into a circus. HOA flyers advertised private air access, only minutes from the clubhouse. SUV convoys rolled up with guests snapping photos. I found champagne corks, tire streaks, even a discarded golf glove. Every time I tried to confront Sarah, she'd pull the same routine, soft voice, fake concern, veiled threat. "Brandon dear, this is good for everyone. Imagine the prestige, you'll be part of something bigger." "I already am," I'd say. "It's called my own land." But she'd just smirk as if laws were suggestions and ownership was negotiable. That's when I called Miguel, my longtime mechanic and friend. We'd worked together back in my crop dusting days, fixing old Pratt & Whitney engines and laughing over coffee at dawn. Miguel took one look at the runway and whistled. Man, they've been using this like it's a highway. You can see the rubber burns from a dozen landings. He crouched down, running a finger over the marks. They didn't even bother to clean up the oil spills. Amateurs. I nodded, my jaw tight. They think they own the sky. Miguel grinned. Maybe it's time to remind them they're still standing on your dirt. I didn't say it out loud, but I was already thinking the same thing. I started documenting everything. Every plane that landed, every event invite I could find online, every smug quote Sarah gave to her HOA newsletter. I even bought a couple of trail cameras, disguised them as fence posts, and aimed them right at the airstrip. The footage I got was pure gold. HOA members clinking glasses on my property, guests posing for Instagram with captions like, "Private landing for brunch, thanks Whitmore." HOA Sarah herself cutting a red ribbon across my runway as if she were christening a yacht. Still, I kept my cool. I've learned that patience is the farmer's best weapon and the HOA's worst nightmare. One afternoon, I caught Sarah by the fence. She was dressed like she'd stepped out of a catalog, coral blazer, pearl necklace, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my pickup. She was supervising a work crew installing portable runway lights on my soil. "Sarah," I called out. "You planning a light show?" She turned, smiling. "Safety, Brandon. You wouldn't want anyone getting hurt. Then maybe I said you shouldn't be landing planes on private property." Her eyes narrowed, the smile frozen. "You're being unreasonable. The board voted unanimously that this runway benefits the community." "Funny," I said, "because last I checked, I'm the community here." She laughed, that hollow kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. "You'll come around." Everyone does, eventually. That night I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sunset burn orange over the fields. The airstrip shimmered in the fading light, calm, silent, almost mocking. That's when I decided Sarah Nelson had flown too close to the Sunday. The next morning I drove into town, pulled the county records, and confirmed what I already knew: the HOA's claim was bogus. The so-called amenity zone was a decades-old draft map never legally approved. In short, she had nothing. But I also knew paperwork wouldn't stop her. People like Sarah only learn one way: when the world reminds them gravity still exists. So I stopped fighting on her level. No more arguing, no more emails. Instead, I started planning. Quietly, methodically. The same way I used to design irrigation systems: one line, one valve, one perfect pressure point at a time. My plan wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. Proof that arrogance has consequences. Proof that you can't just steal land and call it community improvement. And maybe, just maybe, a little poetic justice wouldn't hurt. Because when you treat a man's farm like your personal airport, you shouldn't be surprised if the landing gets a little slippery. The day after I made up my mind to stop playing nice, Sarah Nelson hosted what she called the Whitmore Aviation Social. She plastered it all over social media: glossy invitations, gold lettering, promises of exclusive private landings, gourmet brunch, and live music. On my runway, when I saw the ad, I nearly spat out my coffee. I counted at least 3 photos taken from my own property. One even showed my red barn in the background, captioned, "Where luxury meets the sky." I didn't say a word. I just smiled, picked up my phone, and started recording everything. That morning, the airstrip looked like a suburban carnival. Fancy tents went up overnight, catering trucks lined the gravel road, and somebody, probably HOA volunteers, had hung banners reading "Whitmore Landing, Grand Opening." I parked my truck by the fence and watched, sipping my coffee, as cars rolled in. Sarah strutted across the grass in a bright yellow sundress and matching hat, waving like royalty. She greeted every guest with a hug, telling them how the HOA had partnered with a local landowner to bring air access to the community. I was that local landowner, apparently, except no one bothered to tell me. The first plane touched down around 9 a.m. A sleek white jet glided over the field and landed like a show pony. Guests applauded. Music blared. Sarah clapped dramatically, calling out, "Welcome to Whitmore Landing, everyone. Champagne is waiting by the tent." I swear if arrogance could fly, that woman would never need a runway. As guests wandered toward the brunch tent, I spotted Miguel leaning on my fence, chewing on a toothpick. "You gonna stop this circus, Brandon?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let her dig the hole deeper." Miguel smirked. "You're thinking something big, huh? Let's just say I'm making sure the landing's smoother next time," I said. He chuckled. "Or maybe rougher." While Sarah entertained her crowd, I walked the perimeter, taking photos, tire tracks, trash, even a table set up right on top of one of my irrigation lines. They'd turned a working farm into a playground for their egos. By noon, I counted 3 landings, 2 drone photographers, and 1 poor pilot who looked like he wanted to disappear. That's when Sarah spotted me. "Mr. Green," she called out cheerfully, as if we were business partners. "I'm so glad you could join us. Isn't this magnificent? I looked around at the chaos. Magnificent's one word for it. Illegal's another. Her smile flickered just for a second. Oh, don't be dramatic. You're part of something historic. This is progress. Progress that's trampling my crops. Oh, Brandon, she sighed, lowering her voice like she was consoling a child. You can't stop change. We're elevating the community. You'll thank me someday. I leaned closer. You're trespassing, Sarah. And I have every second of it on camera. Her eyes narrowed, that glossy HOA charm sliding right off her face. If you want to make trouble, be my guest. But remember, we have lawyers too. Then she turned on her heel and sashayed away her entourage, following like ducklings. That night, after the grand opening ended, I walked the runway with a flashlight. Oil stains, broken glass, plastic forks, the place looked like a war zone. I knelt down, brushed my fingers over the skid marks, and thought about all the rules she'd broken, all the people she'd manipulated. And that's when the idea for my plan really started to take shape. I couldn't count on the county or the FAA to act fast. Sarah's brother still sat on the zoning board, and every time I filed a complaint, it got lost in review. I needed something undeniable, something that would make the entire HOA and the world see who she really was. But before I moved forward, I wanted to test her limits. The next week, I put up a brand new sign at the end of my driveway: private property, no air access. Trespassers will be reported. By the following morning, it was gone, vanished, pulled out of the ground. I replaced it. That one disappeared too. By the third sign, I attached a camera. Guess who showed up at 6:45 a.m.? Wearing gardening gloves and sunglasses, Sarah Nelson herself, yanking it out and tossing it into her trunk like she was taking out the trash. I couldn't help but laugh when I watched the footage. All right, I said to myself. You just earned yourself a flight lesson you'll never forget. Over the next few days, I noticed the HOA had gone from cautious to cocky. They started painting the words Whitmore HOA Landing Zone right on the asphalt, bold white letters stretching across the edge of my property. They even hired a landscaping crew to beautify the surrounding field. My field, Miguel, was livid. They're treating your land like it's a backyard runway for billionaires. Good, I said. Let them get comfortable. He raised an eyebrow. You've got that look again, the one you get before something mechanical explodes. I grinned. Don't worry, amigo. I'm not blowing anything up. Just teaching physics. See, back in my engineering days, I learned something about human behavior and friction. When you mix arrogance with speed, things get unpredictable. I spent evenings reviewing my camera footage, noting patterns when the planes landed, where they taxied, how Sarah always insisted on photo-perfect takeoffs. She was addicted to spectacle, and the more public, the better. Then, as if fate itself wanted to help me, Sarah announced her biggest stunt, yet a helicopter showcase for HOA members. The invitation was full of buzzwords: exclusive preview, aerial lifestyle, elevating the community. It even listed the same coordinates as my private airstrip. I couldn't have scripted it better. The day before the event, I walked the runway one last time. The air smelled of rain and jet fuel. My cornfields rustled softly in the breeze, unaware they were about to witness the most satisfying landing in HOA history. Miguel pulled up in his truck window down. You sure about this, Brandon? I nodded. Completely. He studied me for a moment, then laughed. You know, sometimes I think you missed your calling as a magician. Maybe, I said. But I've always been good at disappearing arrogance. When he drove off, I stood alone under the moonlight, staring at the strip of asphalt that had caused so much grief. It gleamed faintly, reflecting the silver of the night sky, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. Because I knew that when those HOA folks came roaring down my runway tomorrow, their arrogance would finally meet reality, and reality was a lot slicker than they imagined. So I went home, poured myself one last glass of whiskey, and watched the security feeds from my porch. The runway looked peaceful, waiting. My plan was simple, foolproof, and perfectly poetic. I smiled and whispered to myself, let's see if Queen Sarah can handle a little turbulence. By dawn the next morning, my phone was already buzzing with alerts. The HOA's official Facebook page had posted a glittery announcement in all caps: Today Whitmore HOA presents our helicopter showcase, experience luxury above the clouds. There she was, Sarah Nelson, 60 years old, and dressed like the mayor of heaven, smiling beneath a banner that had my airstrip in the background. She'd captioned it, "Our community deserves nothing less than excellence." I laughed so hard, I nearly choked on my coffee. Excellence, huh? That word was about to take a nosedive straight into a cornfield. The air that morning was crisp sun rising behind my barn. Dew shimmered across the runway, the world quiet except for distant tractors and birds. But I knew peace wouldn't last. Miguel rolled up in his old Chevy pickup, grinning under his cap. "Big day, Brandon," he said. "You ready for takeoff?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, checking my camera setup. I'd installed 4 motion-triggered cameras around the airstrip, all recording to a secure drive in my workshop. Every angle was covered: the entrance, the runway, and most importantly, the cornfield. Remember, Miguel said once it happens, stay cool. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. "I'm just here for the show," I said with a wink. By 8 o'clock, I could already hear engines approaching. A convoy of shiny SUVs pulled up, tires crunching on gravel. HOA board members spilled out, men in linen suits, women in oversized sunglasses. Then last, as always, came Sarah Nelson, stepping out like she was walking a red carpet. Her hair was perfect, her smile rehearsed. And in her manicured hand, she held a clipboard thicker than my tax returns. "Brandon," she said brightly, spotting me near the fence. "Glad you came to support the community. You'll see this event is going to put Whitmore on the map." "Already did," I said. "It's right there. See that line?" I pointed at the fence, separating my property from hers. "That's the map." She laughed her high, dismissive laugh. "Oh, you and your boundaries. You really should loosen up. Everyone benefits from collaboration." "I prefer cooperation with consent," I said. She gave a smirk that could curdle milk. "I sent you an invitation, didn't I? That's consent enough." "Sarah," I said calmly, "you might want to check who you're flying over before you take off." But she was already walking away, waving her clipboard like a scepter. "Enjoy the show, Mr. Green." The guests gathered near the tents as the helicopter arrived, a glossy black Bell 407, the kind that screams, "I overpay my HOA dues." It circled once before descending onto the runway, kicking up a storm of dust and corn husks. Cameras flashed, people clapped. Sarah threw her arms out like a preacher on Sunday morning. "See luxury progress. Our community taking flight." Miguel whispered beside me, "She's about to really take flight." The helicopter shut down for a few minutes, letting passengers disembark. They posed for photos in front of it, holding glasses of champagne. A local influencer live-streamed the whole thing, talking about innovation in suburban living. Then, after the photo ops and speeches, the pilot climbed back in, preparing for takeoff. The crowd gathered at a safe distance, or what they thought was safe. Sarah waved at the cameras, shouting, "Whitmore HOA takes to the skies." The helicopter began to lift rotors, spinning faster, the wind howling. But as it gained speed down the runway, something changed. The wheels started to slide. At first, I thought maybe the pilot misjudged the throttle, but then the skids began to fishtail, the machine veering left like it had hit black ice. The pilot tried to correct, too late. The helicopter spun once, twice, then skidded off the runway and plowed into my cornfield, disappearing in a glorious spray of dust, dirt, and stalks. The crowd screamed. Sarah dropped her champagne flute, eyes wide. Cameras kept rolling, dozens of phones capturing every second. I jogged up to the fence, pretending to look horrified. "Everyone okay in there?" I shouted. The rotors had already stopped by the time Sarah stormed forward, her yellow heels sinking into the mud. "What happened? Who did this?" she yelled. "Looks like the ground didn't agree with your event permit," I said. She whipped toward me, face red as a traffic light. "You did this, Brandon. You sabotaged us," I shrugged. "Me, I'm just a spectator on my own property." "You said this was community land, remember?" Miguel, trying not to laugh, added. "Maybe gravity joined your HOA." Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Sheriff's cruisers, fire trucks, and an FAA inspection vehicle rolled up. The responders rushed to the field, but thankfully everyone was shaken, not seriously injured. The helicopter's tail was bent like a pretzel, and my poor corn looked like it had survived a hurricane. The FAA agent, a tall man in aviator sunglasses, approached me. "You, the property owner?" "Yes, sir." He nodded. "We'll need your flight logs, property documents, and any surveillance footage." "Oh, you'll get all of that," I said, smiling. "I've been documenting their little air shows for weeks." Sarah overheard and nearly combusted. "This is outrageous. We had full authorization," the agent frowned. "From whom?" "From the HOA," she snapped. "It's community property." He glanced at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, this land is registered under federal aviation jurisdiction, private use only, owned by Mr. Brandon Green. You're trespassing." Her jaw dropped. "That's impossible." "My brother," "Ma'am," the agent interrupted, "your brother isn't the FAA." I swear I could see the exact moment she realized her empire was built on sand. The press coverage was immediate. Local reporters showed up within hours, drones hovering overhead, headlines, spinning helicopter crashes during HOA event on private farm. HOA president faces investigation for illegal use of airstrip. Sarah tried to hide behind her designer sunglasses, barking at her lawyer over the phone. Meanwhile, I stood quietly by my fence watching the chaos unfold. Miguel nudged me. "You sure you don't want to tell them? Tell them what I said," grinning. "That the runway was a little slick this morning," he chuckled. "You're a bad man, Brandon." "Not bad," I said. "Just educated." The FAA agent took my statement, confirmed my ownership papers, and ordered a full inspection. By sunset, the entire HOA event had been declared a violation of multiple aviation codes. Sarah's guests drove off in silence, their luxury cars splattered with mud. As the last police cruiser left, Sarah approached me one final time, her heels ruined, her pride shredded. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You'll regret this." "I have lawyers, I have influence," I cut her off. "Sarah, you had everything: respect, wealth, neighbors who trusted you. And you traded it all to play pilot on someone else's land. Maybe next time read the fine print before you take off?" She glared at me, trembling, before storming back to her car. Miguel whistled low. "Well, he said that's one way to harvest corn." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in months. Best crop I ever grew. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, watching the flashing lights fade down the road. The runway lay silent again, the way it was meant to be. My cameras blinked softly in the dark, each one holding proof of what really happened. For the first time in a long while, the air smelled like peace, and maybe just a hint of poetic justice. By the next morning, the entire county had heard about it. You couldn't walk into the diner, the post office, or even the gas station without hearing the words HOA and helicopter crash in the same sentence. And everywhere I went, people had the same question: "Did you see it, Brandon?" I'd just smile and say, "Front row seat." The footage from my security cameras had already gone viral. One of Miguel's buddies posted a clip on Facebook, the helicopter, sliding sideways, Sarah Nelson screaming in the background, and within hours it was on local news. By evening, a national aviation blog had picked it up under the headline, "Luxury HOA Event Ends in Cornfield Chaos." It was beautiful. Not because anyone got hurt, thank God they didn't, but because the whole thing finally made people look. The arrogance, the entitlement, the blind confidence that Sarah and her board could rewrite property lines and call it community progress. Now they had to face the reality and the cameras. That afternoon, as I was repairing a fence post the helicopter had taken out, I saw a convoy of black SUVs roll up the dirt road again. For a moment, I thought Sarah had come back for round two. But when the doors opened out, stepped 3 FAA agents, 2 county investigators, and a man with a clipboard who looked like he could smell lies from a mile away. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a badge that said Federal Aviation Compliance, walked right up to me. "Mr. Brandon Green, that's me." She extended her hand. "Agent Morrison, FAA. We'll need your cooperation in our investigation." "Ma'am," I said, shaking her hand, "you can have my full cooperation and some fresh lemonade if you'd like." They followed me to the porch where I'd set up all my documentation: property deeds, FAA certification, camera footage, timestamps, even a printed copy of Sarah Nelson's HOA event flyer. Agent Morrison flipped through everything with professional precision. "You've been thorough. I used to design small airfields for the government back in my day," I said. "Old habits die hard." She raised an eyebrow. "You knew this would happen, let's just say," I replied. "I saw it coming." Down by the runway, another agent was interviewing Miguel, who was showing them where the helicopter had gone off course. They took soil samples, inspected tire marks, and measured the exact boundaries of the property. I didn't interfere, I just let them do their job. A few hours later, who else but Sarah Nelson arrived, this time not in her usual pastel luxury SUV, but in a beige sedan that looked borrowed. She stepped out wearing sunglasses bigger than her face, and an expression caught somewhere between fury and panic. "Mr. Green," she snapped the moment she spotted me. "I demand to know why you're allowing federal agents to snoop around our community property." I glanced at Agent Morrison, who crossed her arms. "Ma'am," she said flatly, "this isn't community property, and this investigation is federal." Sarah's jaw tensed. "I have documents. We've seen your documents," Morrison cut in. "They're fraudulent. You altered county boundary records without authorization. That's a felony." The color drained from Sarah's face. For a second, she actually wobbled, clutching her designer bag like a life preserver. "There must be a misunderstanding." "No, ma'am," Morrison said. "The misunderstanding was thinking you could declare federal airspace a homeowner's amenity." I leaned on the porch rail, sipping my lemonade. "She's got a point, Sarah." Sarah spun toward me, eyes blazing. "You think this is funny? You've ruined everything. Do you realize what you've done to my reputation?" "Oh, I think your helicopter did that," I said calmly. "All I did was grow corn." Miguel snorted so loudly behind her that I had to cough to keep from laughing. The FAA agents wrapped up their inspection around sunset. They handed me a document confirming my Airstrip's private status, signed and sealed. Sarah, meanwhile, was served with a temporary injunction against operating any HOA events involving aircraft. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, probably lawyers, maybe the local news. As she stood there, deflated and furious, I walked up and said softly, "Sarah, you once told me everyone benefits from collaboration. So let's collaborate. You stay off my land and I won't charge you for the cornfield runway rental." She glared at me like she could set me on fire with her mind. "You haven't seen the last of me, Brandon." "I'd prefer not to," I said. "The last time I did, you were upside down in a helicopter." That night, as darkness settled over the fields, I sat with Miguel by the fence. He was laughing so hard he nearly spilled his beer. "I can't believe it, man." The way she screamed, "Who made the runway slippery, priceless?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "That one might echo in my head for a while." "You think she'll try to sue?" he asked. "Oh, definitely," I said. "But she'll regret that too. Because here's the thing about Sarah Nelson, she never knew when to quit." Sure enough, the next morning I got a certified letter delivered to my door. Inside, a formal notice of intent to sue for gross negligence and emotional distress. Miguel read it over my shoulder. Emotional distress. For what existing? Apparently for maintaining a runway that's too advanced for her piloting skills. I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen Carter, who used to handle agricultural land disputes. She laughed when she saw the paperwork. "Brandon, this is gold. You have documentation, video, and witnesses." "She's walking into her own trap." "Good," I said. I was afraid she'd miss it. The following week, reporters began knocking. A crew from a local station interviewed me at the fence. They wanted to know how I felt about the HOA helicopter crash. I told them the truth. I feel relieved. Maybe now they'll remember that property lines exist for a reason. You can't just steal what isn't yours because you think it looks better on your brochure. They loved it. It aired that night under the headline, "Farmer Teaches HOA a Lesson in Boundaries." By the time the segment ended, my phone was flooded with messages. Some from old friends congratulating me, others from strangers who'd had their own HOA horror stories. People started calling me the Airstrip guy. Even my niece in Colorado texted, "Uncle Brandon, you're famous. Grandma says not to let it go to your head." "Too late," I replied. Still under the laughter and headlines, I couldn't shake the sense that Sarah wasn't finished. That woman had the persistence of a mosquito. You swat her once she comes back louder. And I was right. 3 days later, a shiny black car rolled up my driveway. Out stepped a man in a pinstripe suit carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Green," he said, "I represent Mrs. Sarah Nelson of the Whitmore Homeowners Association. Do you now? She intends to file a defamation suit. Claims you intentionally humiliated her and damaged the HOA's reputation." I grinned. "Her helicopter did that, not me." He didn't smile. "She's quite determined." "So am I," said. "And I've got something she doesn't." "What's that?" "Evidence and gravity." He blinked, unsure whether to be confused or scared. "We'll be in touch," he said stiffly, and left. I watched his car disappear down the road and turned to Miguel. "Looks like round two's about to begin." Miguel cracked open another beer. "Well, at least this time no one's flying." He was wrong about that. Because Sarah's ego, it was still soaring and about to crash a lot harder. The sky was quiet again that evening, a deep orange glow settling over the fields. I sat on the porch watching the last bit of sunlight glint off the bent helicopter tail still half buried in my corn. It wasn't pretty, but it was poetic. Sometimes justice doesn't roar in like thunder. It skids, slides, and settles exactly where it belongs. By the end of the week, the story had exploded far beyond our sleepy county. National headlines, talk shows, online tabloids, everyone wanted a piece of the HOA helicopter crash. You couldn't scroll through social media without seeing Sarah Nelson's furious face frozen mid-scream, her yellow heels sinking into my mud like they were being swallowed by karma itself. Even the memes started rolling in. Someone photoshopped her holding a pilot's license made of Monopoly money. Another one showed my cornfield with a sign that said, "Runway closed." Due to Karen, I didn't post any of them, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't laugh. Meanwhile, the FAA report hit the county office like a wrecking ball. The findings were crystal clear. The Whitmore HOA had violated federal aviation statutes, forged boundary documentation, and organized unauthorized aircraft activity on private property. The pilot had no legal clearance to land or take off there. Sarah Nelson's signature was on every approval form. By Monday morning, her pristine suburban kingdom was crumbling. The HOA board called an emergency meeting at their clubhouse, but the moment she walked in, half the members walked out. The rest stayed just long enough to demand her resignation. I wasn't there, of course, but according to Miguel, who had a friend on the maintenance crew, Sarah's meltdown could have qualified for an F5 rating. She threw a clipboard at the wall, Miguel told me, laughing over lunch, started yelling about conspiracies and sabotage, said the FAA was out to get her. Then she blamed you, me, and the entire corn industry. Did she mention gravity? I asked. Only that it's biased. I nearly choked on my sandwich. But humor aside, the fallout was serious. The HOA was bleeding money. They had to refund event sponsors, repair damages, and pay fines. Homeowners started withdrawing membership dues, furious that their money had funded illegal runway brunches. A week later, a formal letter arrived for me, stamped with the county seal. It wasn't from Sarah this time. It was from the district attorney's office, requesting my cooperation as a witness in a pending investigation into document forgery and misuse of public office. Turns out Sarah's brother, the zoning board official, had quietly retired the day after the FAA report was published. Retired as in forced out with a lawyer's handshake. When I showed the letter to Miguel, he whistled. "You really did it, man. You didn't just beat her. You blew up her entire empire." I smiled. I didn't blow anything up. I just let the wind carry the truth. Still, I wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention. Reporters started camping at the end of my driveway, hoping for another quote. They wanted me to be the folksy hero who took down the HOA. I wasn't a hero, just a stubborn man who didn't like bullies. So I gave one last interview to the local news and said exactly that. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. You can't call something yours just because it's convenient. And if you try to fly too high on someone else's land, don't be surprised when you fall. That soundbite aired everywhere. I got letters from people all over the country, ranchers, homeowners, even ex-HOA board members thanking me for standing up. One man wrote, "You spoke for all of us who got fined for painting our fences the wrong shade of beige." But Sarah wasn't done. Not yet. 2 weeks after the crash, her lawyer filed an official civil lawsuit, Nelson v. Green, claiming defamation, intentional humiliation, and sabotage. The news stations ate it up like popcorn. I wasn't worried. My lawyer, Ellen Carter, was twice as sharp as Sarah's entire board put together. She reviewed every piece of evidence, the footage, the FAA documents, the signed forms, and grinned. "She's suing you for defamation," Ellen said. "Brandon, you didn't defame her. You just recorded her doing the defamation herself. Then I guess I'll bring popcorn to court." Ellen smirked. "Bring extra. This'll be good." Before the hearing date, the HOA tried to salvage what was left of their reputation. They hired a PR firm to release a statement. The Whitmore HOA expresses deep regret for recent events. "We are committed to rebuilding trust within our community and reaffirming our values of transparency, respect, and collaboration." It was written like a hostage note. The same day, a photo leaked online, Sarah Nelson leaving a salon, ducking behind her handbag as someone shouted, "Hey Sarah, ready for takeoff." She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. Behind the scenes, HOA members started turning on her. They leaked emails showing she'd authorized every exclusive flight and used HOA funds to rent aircraft without consent. Even worse, one of those flights had been for her birthday party. It all unraveled like a bad soap opera. The day before the court hearing, Sarah showed up unannounced at my property again. This time she came alone, driving an old silver Mercedes that had seen better days. She parked crookedly near the fence and stepped out slowly, her usual swagger replaced by something else, exhaustion, maybe even shame. "Brandon," she called softly, "we need to talk." I stayed by my porch, arms crossed. "We ran out of things to talk about months ago, Sarah." She sighed. "I made mistakes, all right. But you didn't have to humiliate me." I shook my head. "You did that yourself. I just had the camera running." Her voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything, to have people you led turn against you overnight?" "Sure," I said. "But when it happened to me, I didn't build a runway on someone else's farm." She blinked hard, fighting tears, then turned and left without another word. For a brief moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered every lie, every smug grin, every time she stood on my property pretending it was hers. And the pity evaporated like morning dew. The court date came and went faster than I expected. The judge was a no-nonsense woman who clearly had no patience for HOA drama. Sarah's lawyer tried to spin a tale of small-town jealousy and sabotage, but the FAA report shut that down instantly. When Ellen presented the footage of the helicopter crash, complete with Sarah's voice yelling, "Who made the runway slippery?" the courtroom actually laughed. Even the judge smirked. In the end, the lawsuit backfired spectacularly. The judge dismissed Sarah's claims with prejudice and ordered her to pay my legal fees. After the hearing, Ellen clapped me on the shoulder. Congratulations, Mr. Green. You just made legal history for the most self-inflicted HOA disaster of the decade. I chuckled. That ought to go on her next newsletter. Over the next few weeks, life returned to normal, or at least my version of it. The runway was quiet again, the cornfield started to regrow, and the world finally stopped staring at my fence. Miguel and I spent one afternoon repainting the airstrip lines. Think she'll ever try to land here again, he asked. If she does, I said I'll start charging landing fees. He laughed. You could start your own HOA helicopters out always. Tempting, I said. But I've had enough of acronyms for one lifetime. Still, every time I looked at that stretch of asphalt, I couldn't help but smile. Not out of pride or pettiness, but because the place finally felt like mine again. Free, quiet, untouched. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It hums softly like a rotor winding down after a rough landing, steady, peaceful, and perfectly balanced. And in that peace I realized something simple yet powerful. When people mistake your kindness for weakness, the most satisfying thing you can do is stand your ground until they slip on it. The county courthouse was packed. Reporters, HOA members, curious locals, everyone who'd followed the saga of the Airstrip farmer versus the HOA. Queen wanted a front row seat. The air buzzed with gossip and perfume. People whispered my name like I was some sort of outlaw folk hero. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt tired, the kind of tired that settles behind your eyes after months of nonsense. But as I sat at the defendant's table beside my attorney, Ellen Carter, I also felt something else calm. The kind of calm that comes when you know the truth is sitting quietly in your corner. Across the aisle, Sarah Nelson was a picture of forced confidence. She wore a navy suit far too crisp for comfort, her pearls gleaming like she'd polished them with desperation. Her lawyer, a slick city type named Chadwick Holt, flipped through his notes like a magician shuffling a doomed deck of cards. The judge entered Honorable Judge Mary Ann Porter, a woman with iron-gray hair and the kind of stare that could peel paint. Everyone rose. She nodded once, and the bailiff announced court is now in session for Nelson versus Green. Ellen leaned over and whispered, "Remember, you don't need to say much. Let their arrogance do the talking." I nodded. That had worked for me so far. Chadwick rose dramatically. "Your Honor, my client Mrs. Sarah Nelson has suffered immense emotional distress and public humiliation due to the reckless and malicious actions of Mr. Green." He gestured toward me like I'd kicked a puppy. He intentionally altered his property in a way that endangered lives and then released footage online that defamed my client and destroyed her reputation. We are seeking full damages for emotional harm and property loss. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Holt, are you claiming the defendant forced your client's helicopter to crash indirectly, Your Honor, through negligence and intent?" "Intent," Judge Porter repeated. "To do what exactly?" Chadwick hesitated. "To embarrass her." The courtroom snickered. Even Judge Porter cracked the faintest grin. "Well, embarrassment isn't typically grounds for federal litigation, counselor. But proceed." Sarah shot me a glare sharp enough to slice cornstalks. Her lawyer called her to the stand first. She straightened her posture like a queen taking her throne. "Mrs. Nelson," Chadwick began, "can you tell the court how Mr. Green's actions affected you?" She took a deep, shaky breath. "I've been ridiculed, mocked, turned into an internet meme. My leadership credibility within the HOA is gone. My friends avoid me. My life has been shattered because this man," she pointed at me, "dramatically plotted to humiliate me." "Plotted?" the judge interrupted. "Do you have proof of intent?" Sarah's mouth twitched. "I know what he did. The runway was tampered with. It was too slick to take off safely." "And yet," Ellen cut in smoothly, "you used that same runway for months before the incident, correct?" Sarah froze. "That's irrelevant." "On the contrary," Ellen said, standing. "It establishes pattern and consent. You trespassed repeatedly. You hosted paid events, charged guests for airfield access, and ignored written notices to cease operations. Isn't that true?" I had permission from the county." Ellen turned toward the projector where the FAA documents glowed on the screen. "Let's confirm that. Exhibit C, official FAA registration showing ownership and jurisdiction under Brandon Green. Signed and dated 15 years before your HOA existed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ellen continued. "Exhibit D, a copy of the so-called community amenity map submitted by your brother on the zoning board. The same map the county has now declared fraudulent. Do you recognize this?" Sarah's hand trembled slightly. "That's an outdated draft." "Outdated," Ellen repeated, nodding. "And forged." Judge Porter leaned forward. Mrs. Nelson, did you or did you not authorize multiple aircraft landings on property you knew was privately owned? Sarah tried to hold her composure. I believed it was shared land, believed Ellen said. You believed you could redraw property lines with Photoshop. Laughter erupted from the gallery. The judge rapped her gavel for silence, though even she seemed amused. Ellen smiled faintly and played one of the clips from my security cameras. The helicopter sliding, Sarah shrieking, "Who made the runway slippery?" The audio echoed through the courtroom like a comedy soundtrack. Even Miguel sitting behind me had to bury his face in his hands to keep from laughing out loud. When the clip ended, Ellen said calmly, "No further questions." Sarah's face was scarlet. She muttered something under her breath that probably wasn't in the HOA handbook. Now it was my turn. Ellen nodded for me to take the stand. "Mr. Green," she said, "why did you begin documenting the HOA's activities?" "Because I said, keeping my tone steady, they were landing planes on my farm without asking. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it was a business operation. They used my runway for profit, damaged my land, and ignored every request to stop. And did you ever act violently or maliciously toward Mrs. Nelson or the HOA? No, ma'am. I used cameras, paperwork, and patience. Those are legal tools last I checked." A few people chuckled again. Ellen smiled. "So you never publicly humiliated Mrs. Nelson, no. She did that herself when she turned an illegal airshow into a PR stunt." Judge Porter's lips twitched again. Point taken. Chadwick tried to recover with cross-examination. "Mr. Green, isn't it true you modified your runway prior to the incident?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I repainted safety lines, re-leveled the surface, and reposted private signage." He pounced. "So you admit you made changes before the crash. I maintain my property regularly, counselor. The fact that Mrs. Nelson ignored every visible warning sign isn't my fault." The judge leaned back. "Mr. Holt, do you have any actual evidence of wrongdoing?" He hesitated. "Only circumstantial, Your Honor." "Then I suggest you sit down before this turns into stand-up comedy." The gallery laughed again. Chadwick's face fell. When closing arguments came, Ellen stood tall and spoke simply, "Your Honor, this case isn't about negligence. It's about entitlement, the belief that rules apply to everyone except those who write them. Mrs. Nelson's arrogance caused her downfall, not Mr. Green's property management. Sometimes gravity enforces the law better than any court can." Judge Porter nodded slowly, tapping her pen. After a tense pause, she said, "Verdict will be read now." She glanced over her glasses at Sarah. "Mrs. Nelson, you have wasted the court's time with frivolous claims, fabricated documents, and a level of hubris I haven't seen since law school debates. Case dismissed. Defendant's counterclaim for damages is approved. Mrs. Nelson, you owe Mr. Green reimbursement for all legal fees and property damage." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The courtroom exploded in murmurs. I exhaled, slow, steady, the kind of breath you take after holding it for a year. Ellen shook my hand. "Congratulations, Brandon." Justice landed smoothly. "Behind us," Miguel whispered. "You think she'll appeal," maybe I said. "But she's out of altitude." As the courtroom cleared, Sarah lingered near the exit, her eyes glassy. For the first time, she didn't look angry, just lost. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I never wanted a war. I just wanted you to stop trespassing." She looked at me like she didn't understand the words. "You humiliated me." "No," I said. "You humiliated yourself. The difference is I had a camera." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on a sentence she didn't write. When we stepped outside, the sunlight felt cleaner somehow. The reporters swarmed, but Ellen waved them off. Miguel clapped me on the back. "Well, Captain Green," he said, "you landed it perfectly." I laughed. "Nah. The runway just worked the way it was supposed to." As we drove home, the courthouse shrinking in the rearview mirror, I finally felt that knot in my chest loosen. For months, I'd been fighting noise, paperwork, threats, arrogance, and now there was silence again. That night, I sat on my porch watching the stars spread across the sky. A gentle wind rustled the cornfields, whispering like the earth itself was chuckling. I lifted my glass to the horizon and said softly, "Here's to staying grounded." Because at the end of the day, no matter how high some people try to fly, gravity always wins. 3 months passed after the courtroom showdown, and peace finally settled over my farm like a long overdue summer rain. The airstrip was quiet again, no jets, no parties, no HOA banners pretending to own the horizon. Just the sound of wind in the corn and the occasional hum of my tractor. For the first time in a year, I could breathe without feeling watched. The headlines had faded too. HOA helicopter scandal ends in courtroom defeat. had been replaced by whatever new drama the internet needed to devour. That suited me fine. Fame never fit me. I preferred dirt under my boots, not cameras in my face. But not everyone moved on. One crisp October morning I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a small shot of the airstrip freshly taken. Scribbled on the back were the words, "I hope you're happy, Brandon. S.N." I stared at it for a moment, then placed it on my kitchen table. I wasn't angry, not even surprised, just tired. Sarah Nelson was like a storm that refused to die quietly. Still, the note reminded me how far things had gone, and how easily greed, pride, and entitlement could twist ordinary people into something unrecognizable. By then, the Whitmore HOA was in freefall. Half the residents had resigned. The other half were suing Sarah personally. Property values tanked, investors pulled out, and the once glittering Whitmore community sign at the front gate now hung crooked, one bulb flickering like a dying pulse. According to Miguel, their clubhouse had even been foreclosed on. "Guess they'll need a new landing pad," he joked. I smiled. "Maybe I'll rent them space on my driveway. One parking permit per lawsuit." But behind the humor there was something heavier, something unsettled. You see, I wasn't completely innocent in all this. I'd been patient, yes, and legal, sure, but I'd also enjoyed watching her fall a little too much. The smirk when her helicopter spun out. The satisfaction when she lost everything. It had felt like justice, but maybe it was just vengeance with better paperwork. One evening, I sat on the edge of the runway, the same spot where it all began. The asphalt was still slightly scarred, where the helicopter had slid off. The corn had regrown taller than before, waving gently under the moonlight. The smell of earth and fuel still mixed in the air, faint but permanent, like a ghost of what happened. I found myself thinking about Sarah, about how someone could start with good intentions, wanting order, beauty, a sense of belonging, and end up wrecking everything because of pride. Miguel joined me holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You thinking about her again," maybe I said, wondering if she ever learned anything. He took a sip. "People like that don't change easy, but maybe others will. Maybe some other HOA president will think twice before trespassing on a farmer's land." I nodded. "That'd be nice." A week later, a man in a black suit showed up at my door. He wasn't a lawyer or a journalist. He introduced himself as Daniel Briggs, a representative from a federal aviation department I hadn't heard from in years. "Mr. Green," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You might remember me. You consulted on emergency runway projects for us about 15 years ago." "That was another lifetime," I said, smiling. "What brings you here?" "We've been following the situation with the HOA," he said, glancing toward the airstrip. "Quite a fiasco, but your old registration paperwork caught our attention. You filed under a clause that most small operators never used. Federal Auxiliary Access Zone 17B. I raised an eyebrow. "That's still active," he nodded. "Technically, yes. Which means for all these years your runway has been listed as a designated auxiliary emergency landing site under federal jurisdiction." I blinked. "So you're telling me that the HOA wasn't just trespassing on private land," Briggs said. "They were trespassing on federal property." For a moment, I just stared at him, then burst out laughing. "You're kidding." "Not at all," he said. "We're filing final paperwork to reassert federal control, but given your cooperation and maintenance of the site, we'd like to retain you as the local liaison, paid position." I nearly dropped my coffee. "You want me to work for the same agency I retired from on my own land?" He smiled. "You've already been doing the job for free." I laughed again, louder this time. "Well, I'll be damned." Sarah wanted a luxury airstrip. Turns out, she was borrowing one from the federal government. Briggs grinned. "Poetic, isn't it?" After he left, I sat in my old chair on the porch, letting the absurdity sink in. All this time, the arguments, the lawsuits, the helicopter crash, and the land had technically been protected by the same system Sarah claimed to improve. If irony were fuel, I could have powered every plane she ever landed. A few days later, I got a formal letter from the Department of Transportation confirming my new title, Federal Auxiliary Liaison Site B-17. It came with a badge, a maintenance stipend, and a clause that made me chuckle. All local use of the site is restricted to authorized federal operations only, meaning Sarah Nelson could never set foot here again, not even to apologize. When I told Miguel, he laughed so hard he nearly fell off the porch. "You went from angry farmer to federal agent overnight." "Yeah," I said, smirking. "Not bad for a guy who grows corn and collects karma." Word got around fast. Some locals even started calling me Commander Green. I hated the nickname, but I'll admit it had a nice ring to it. As for Sarah, she disappeared from public life entirely. Rumor had it she moved to Florida, joined a different HOA, and tried to start fresh. I wished her luck. The world's full of fences, some wooden, some invisible. Maybe she'd finally learn which ones not to cross. The months rolled by, seasons changed. My runway stayed quiet except for the occasional emergency drill the agency requested. I didn't mind. The hum of engines, the steady wind across the fields, they reminded me of who I used to be, and who I still was. One evening I watched a small federal training jet descend smooth and silent, touching down perfectly on the asphalt that had caused so much chaos. It paused engines cooling before lifting off again into the fading orange sky. It was beautiful, controlled, peaceful. As the jet disappeared into the clouds, I whispered, "That's how it's supposed to be." I thought about everything that had happened, the lawsuits, the lies, the laughter. And for the first time, it all felt distant, almost like someone else's story. I stood up, dusted my hands, and walked toward the barn, glancing once more at the horizon, glowing with twilight. Sarah Nelson had tried to steal my sky, but in the end, she only reminded me how wide it really was, and how small the people who think they can own it truly are. I turned off the porch light and headed inside, the night settling gently around me. The runway gleamed faintly under the moon, smooth, silent, untouchable. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it landed softly and never took off again. If there's one thing this whole mess taught me, it's that boundaries matter, not just fences or maps, but the invisible lines between respect and entitlement. Sarah Nelson thought she could build her happiness on someone else's foundation, but happiness built on arrogance always cracks. Sooner or later, life finds a way to balance the scales, sometimes with a lawsuit, sometimes with a skid into a cornfield. The truth is, revenge feels sweet for a moment, but justice, real justice, tastes better because it doesn't rot your heart. It's quiet, patient. It's the kind that lets you sleep at night knowing you didn't have to become what you hated. To everyone watching, whether you've had your own HOA Sarah in life or someone trying to claim what's yours, remember this: you don't need to shout, threaten, or stoop to their level. Just know your rights, stand your ground, and let time, and maybe a little gravity, do the rest. Because arrogance might take off fast, but it always lands hard. What would you have done if someone tried to use your Airstrip without permission? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more HOA karma stories like this one.